Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Sleepless Cinematic Podcast, where we explore our shared love for watching and discussing movies recorded in the late after-work hours, often in lieu of a good night's rest. I'm Emilio, and for this bonus episode, it's just me, at least at the very top. My wonderful better two-thirds of this podcast, Madeline and Julian, graciously gave me their blessing to go rogue and try something new. Much of what makes this podcast special to me, and hopefully to all of you out there listening, is that we do this together and get loopy in the wee hours of the night, nerding out. So it feels a little weird to be trying something like this. But about a month or so ago, I realized that we'd be getting a remake released theatrically of a film that I absolutely love, which is Ang Lee's The Wedding Banquet. Now, the three of us work and have busy lives outside of this podcast. We do this for the love of it. And we weren't quite able to make a conversation happen, but I'm ready to do the next best thing, which is talk about it myself a bit and talk a bit about my experience watching the remake. And then invite on one of my film school professors, Professor Zhen Zhang, who has a deep knowledge of this film and Asian cinema at large, to discuss Ang Lee's beginnings, some of the film's themes, and other reflections on the original. There are a few light spoilers ahead that I will call out, but what will follow is going to stay mostly spoiler-free. So this is intended to be a companion to both the initiated and uninitiated to the original and a little bit to the remake as well. The original Wedding Banquet from 1993 is, in my opinion, quite underseen and quite underappreciated. And I hope that the remake and some discussion of it brings some well-deserved attention to the original film that spawned it. I tend to like, or at the very least respect, movies that start somewhere very different than where they end up. And that sounds like the very definition of even an average movie. Like, wow, that's a pretty low bar, Emilio. But what I mean by that is you, the audience member, start the film thinking you'll have a sense of where this movie is going to go. But when you get to the finish line, you are pleasantly surprised by how much more invested you've become in the story because something changed. And you end up taking away more from the film than you originally thought you would. And that is Ang Lee's The Wedding Banquet in a nutshell. I'll share a bit more about how I came to this film in a moment, but when I first saw it, I had very few expectations. And this movie just pulled me into its orbit, made me care deeply for its characters, all five of them. And by the end of the film, I was practically on the verge of tears, feeling equal parts sad and happy for everyone, which kind of blew me away. And seeing this film again in the last few weeks, I felt all of that all over again, even more in awe of the balance this film finds in taking a screwball premise and, as I said before, leaving you somewhere very different with your heart ripped out, but against all odds, with a smile on your face. It's a very unique film for that reason. So here's the setup. We are in New York City. It's the early 90s, and we meet Wei Tung, a young Taiwanese man in his early 30s. He came to the States for college and stuck around and found his footing in business and ultimately secured enough capital to buy a building and become a landlord. His conservative parents, Mr. and Mrs. Gao, a recently retired military father, and his doting mother, they have never visited him in America, but they stay closely in touch with him, though it's often to gauge whether or not Wei Tung has found a woman to start a family with. This is a touchy and difficult dynamic for Wei Tung because he has been concealing something from his parents for many years, which is that he is gay and that he's had a romantic partner, an American man named Simon, for many years now. Recognizing the shame this would bring to his family and the lengths to which Wei Tung goes to keep this truth from his parents, Simon suggests a solution to the issue, which is that Wei Tung can marry one of his tenants, a struggling artist from mainland China named Wei Wei, who's about to get deported herself, supply her with a green card to stay in the States, secure a nice tax break for himself and for Simon, all while appeasing his parents, who desperately desire the peace of mind that comes with their son being married. Oh boy, if it were only that simple. Because upon hearing this news, Wei Tung's parents arrive in New York City looking to commemorate their son's nuptials with a traditional wedding banquet ceremony, a move that forces Wei Tong, Simon, and Wei Wei to keep the ruse going to them in person. And this becomes more and more difficult as the traditions and expectations of the older generation collide head on with the unconventional lives and realities of the younger generation. I'll start by saying that I don't think this is a perfect movie. I think you can see some of the limitations of the film's low budget here and there. This was a very low budget film, a very successful film, actually. One of the most successful films, I think, of that year, according to Wikipedia. There are a few moments where the acting by some of the characters does feel a tiny bit stiff. And I think there are a few decisions pertaining to its portrayal of gay characters that today would be most likely done very differently. And I think that's one of the reasons why this film has been reimagined, this time by a queer filmmaker. All that being said, there is an earnestness to this original film that I think just pays dividends and feels very daring for when it was released in the early 1990s, particularly for how much we're asked to care for Wei Tong and Simon and see them as lovers worthy of each other and also worthy of our empathy. And the original is particularly adept at balancing the desires of the gay couple at its center with the desires of Mr. and Mrs. Gao. It treats the joy and pain that both of these parties feel with an equal amount of reverence, understanding, and grace. We may be rooting for Wei Tong and Simon to pull this off with Wei Wei and have this happy ending where everyone is able to, be happy and placated. But it's not out of left field for you to wish that it also doesn't have to come at the parents' expense. Because by the middle of this film, we see Wei Tong's parents as more full characters who have really just been conditioned by long-standing social expectations. And if we're being honest, we don't really want to see them brokenhearted. It's one of the really deft moves that Ang Lee has up his sleeve as this film's co-writer and storyteller. We end up with the hallmark of truly great storytelling, in my opinion, which is that there's conflict everywhere, but there aren't clear villains or victims, just nuance that I think stands the test of time and holds up to many different interpretations. There are several scenes that come up throughout this film where Wei Tong and Wei Wei have to confront the earnestness and joy that Mr. and Mrs. Gao show them. One in particular comes to mind, which happens on the morning of the wedding. There's a scene on a bed where Wei Tong and his parents, they reminisce about him as a youth, and it is really tender and sweet, and it is also heartbreaking because Mr. and Mrs. Gao delight in this one last moment where they're able to see their son as a little boy. But Wei Tong can't escape the feeling that he is not the ideal that they think he is. In several deeply empathetic scenes, Wei Tong and Wei Wei just have to stay guarded and can't share in the joy his parents feel. And in a move that I think more modern audiences might push back on, but I find deeply interesting, Lee makes space in the direction and the performances to suggest that perhaps there's a part of them that wishes that they could feel this joy, even for a moment. Again, just tender and sweet and truly heartbreaking. Those are words that can be used to describe many scenes in the final 2/3 of this film. So where is this movie to go? If you've seen this movie, then you know how masterfully this movie finds a conclusion. Not one with many answers, but a deeply satisfying one nonetheless. I had a chance to see the remake of this film just a couple days ago. I got to say, I liked it quite a bit. I was a little nervous at some point around the half-hour mark because I felt that it might have been trying to juggle the arcs of too many characters. And I really liked all four of the main characters. In this remake, there are two couples, a lesbian and gay couple, that have to take part in some form of deception. I think all four of the leads are quite effective. I was particularly moved by Kelly Marie Tran as the Angela in this film. One of the first details that I liked that jumped out to me about the remake was that two of the characters, Chris, who's played by Bowen Yang, and Angela, again, played by Kelly Marie Tran, are depicted as mostly likable, but kind of rudderless and maybe a little frustrating, not just to their partners, but they make decisions that I think could be very frustrating to audiences. I think one of the things that you see in a film like the original Wedding Banquet, which is a film with mainstream aspirations back in the early 1990s, even though it was an indie film, is that the queer characters are pretty exceptional. This might be a little bit presumptuous to say, but I can see how Ang Lee and his co-writers Neil Peng and James Schamus might not want to portray them with such obvious flaws, like the kind that a less open-minded viewer could hypothetically hold against them. Wei Tong and Simon are successful, responsible, they have friends, they're shown to work through struggles in their relationship. Simon in particular goes to great lengths to learn Mandarin to connect with Mr. and Mrs. Gao. The biggest gripe the audience might have with them is just concocting the ill-fated ruse. And even that feels rooted in something quite understandable, I think, as the movie goes on. So whether it's intentional or not on the part of the remake's writer and director, Andrew Ahn, I like that his queer characters are allowed to be complicated, maybe unlikable and immature at times. I personally think it's really important that representation not just be a surface level thing, that underrepresented characters on screen are given the latitude to be just as complex as more conventional actors. So that was awesome. Well done, Team Remake. That was cool. On a music note, too, the score was really nice all throughout. It stands out just enough for you to not just feel it, but also hear it and take that in. It was really cool. So I find the balance of humor and drama, for my sensibilities, to work a little better in the original, as I think it softens the viewer a bit more and can therefore go further emotionally. I'm going to use a phrase that a past guest of ours, Rob McClure, shared with us from working with Broadway director Jerry Zaks. Quote, "The sound of laughter is the sound of the audience falling in love," end quote. I think the humor in Ang Lee's Wedding Banquet gets you laughing and then puts these characters you've grown to love in a situation where no one can truly win and someone's bound to get hurt, and therefore we get extremely invested. The remake has some laughs, definitely some quippy lines here and there, and even brings back the original's like rushed home makeover sequence, which is kind of fun. But I'd say that the humor is a little less pronounced and is usually dropped suddenly, I think, in favor of a more dramatic beat. It happens a number of times throughout the movie. And the humor and the drama just don't coexist in the same scene together with the light touch of the original, at least for me. There's a decision pertaining to a character's grandmother that I found a bit surprising, as I felt it removed the ability to not only create humor, but also took some of the central conflict out of the narrative. There are some touching scenes with Joan Chen's mother character for Angela, and Yuan Ye Jung has a particularly nice moment where the camera just watch someone. It's very affecting. But I felt that the dynamic of the older generation in this film is very different. I think intentionally so, but definitely different. And I struggled a bit to find where their inclusion in the narrative was truly adding to the younger generation's conflicts. And that push-pull is baked into the original's DNA, so much so that I missed having a compelling or a more compelling older-younger generation dynamic. And maybe I missed something. I don't know. I should say, too, I am neither queer nor Asian, so I'd welcome the perspective of others on this. That being said, the remake, in my opinion, still has a really satisfying ending by shifting the emotional payoff of the film away from equally including the older generation and instead centering its two queer couples. I sense that Andrew Ahn's take on The Wedding Banquet is trying to give its queer characters the kind of grace and ending that has long been afforded to heterosexual characters on film. and I particularly liked where this film ended up. I think it sticks the landing really nicely. So if I was asked to compare these movies, I'd say that the remake is quite good, and the original is quite great. These are both films that care deeply about their queer characters. They care about how the world sees them, and they care for their ability to be themselves, free of judgment. And they care enough to consider what they want against the currents of society and tradition. And these are also films that want you to care for them too. So I'd say you should absolutely see the remake. I think it's very good, and my hat is off to everybody who worked on that movie. I might still be team original here, though. And for me, it comes down to the complexities that the older generation brings to the story. I feel like the remake uses the older generation a little more as a reminder of familial bonds, and the original sees them more or less as the soul of the film. And their journey brings out emotions and layers to the story that I still marvel at. I personally love the ending notes of both films, but particularly the originals. It might be generalizing a bit to characterize it this way, but I think the remake is going for compassionate and resolute, whereas the original is compassionate and unresolved. And for my taste, movies that feel unresolved and invite you to continue thinking and exploring your feelings on the drive home or the next day, those are the ones that we really never forget. Those are the ones that really stay with us. And that's not to say that the remake doesn't also leave you feeling a lot, but the uncertainty at the heart of the original manages to not shortchange anyone. It just makes the film feel more universal. And yeah, it's definitely stayed with me and will continue to stay with me for years to come. So I recommend the remake, but I highly, highly recommend seeing the original Wedding Banquet. It's a hard movie to find. As of this recording, I don't think it's available on a streaming service. That being said, I would check your local libraries or their reciprocal lending systems. I'm neither confirming nor denying, but a little birdie told me that if you search online, you won't have to look too hard to find a pretty good transfer with English subtitles available to stream. The original is absolutely worth it. Not only to help inform or to help round out your experience seeing the remake, which has been in theaters for just about a week now, but just to see a great film from a filmmaker that would go on to have a fantastic career and continue making wonderful movies. And now for a different perspective, please enjoy my chat with NYU Professor Zhen Zhang, where we catch up after several years to discuss the original Wedding Banquet. We spoke about a week before the remake's release in America and look at the original from a couple of different angles. Our guest today is a decorated and seasoned academic, currently a professor at NYU's Tisch School of the Arts, where she is also the founding director of the Asian Film and Media Initiative. She has co-organized and guest-curated film programs for the Film Society at Lincoln Center of Performing Arts, the Museum of Modern Art in New York, and the Women Make Waves Film Festival in Taipei. Some years back, as an undergraduate, I took her seminar on the films of Ang Lee, and it was here that I first saw The Wedding Banquet. Now, sometimes in film school, you see movies that you are told are important or told that you should care about and appreciate. I did not have to be told anything. I just had to see this one to know how special and resonant it was. I knew right away that I had seen a great film that would be in my life forever. I'm appreciative to her for introducing this wonderful film to me and elated that we get to chat a little bit more about it as the film is getting a reimagined remake care of writer-director Andrew Ahn, and it's being released very soon. Professor Zhen Zhang, welcome to the Sleepless Cinematic Podcast.
Thank you. I love the name of your podcast. Actually, this is my first podcast debut. So
amazing. Yes. I'm elated to hear that. I will say it's late for me, but it's early for you because you were gracious enough to do this all the way from Shanghai. You are 7,000 miles away, but with the help of modern technology, we are face to face for this talk.
After so many years, yes.
Absolutely. This is really, really cool to say. I also just want to say, too, before we jump into this a little bit, that I held on to this book that you assigned for our seminar, which is The Cinema of Ang Lee, The Other Side of the Screen. It's still very much in my possession, and it's something that for as long as we speak today, it's definitely going to inform my thoughts.
Yes, great that you still have it. I was just thinking the other day, I'd like to offer this class again. I haven't taught in years, so maybe it's time to pick it up again.
I really hope you do. And like I said up front, this was the second movie that you screened for that class. And this felt to me like, oh, this is the proof of concept. This is where you really see like how special of a filmmaker Ang Lee is. Because there's so many ways this movie could have, I think, just been kind of retrograde. Like it could have been a really unpleasant film, I think. But it's so the opposite. It's such a beautiful film. And I think it's a timeless film. Yeah, I'm so excited to talk about it. Real quick, before we get started, do you remember the first time you saw this movie?
That's a very good question. Oh, I'm getting old now. So many films I've seen 10 times for teaching and so on.
Of course.
So sometimes I forget where I saw it as a regular audience member. Let me think. It might have been in my grad school in Chicago. It was early 90s when the film was first released, right?
Yeah.
So I was there doing my PhD, and I think it was in Chicago, downtown, and I thought, okay, I had to see this, you know. And his name was still relatively new to even us as Chinese. So I had, we had to go. So I think it was there.
I would not have expected you to remember this, but I'm from Chicago. And so, and my parents actually met at the University of Chicago, which I believe is, there you go. So there's a lot of connection there.
Everything happens for a reason.
There you go.
People meet and reunite, and there you go.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I was trying to think of the theaters there. There was like the Three Penny and the Esquire and the Biograph and the Music Box still there. So it's a great city for cinema.
Yeah, I know. I have fond memories of the city. I'd like to go again.
Cool.
The place I saw it probably would be the Art Institute auditorium or something like that.
Cool.
In that area where the museums are.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So that was it. Yes, the film was a phenomenon back then, right? It just broke into the American mainstream cinema scene even. I mean, the film is sort of about a marginalized immigrant group and the queer community back then, right? Especially. And by a very little known Taiwanese American filmmaker, who? An Lee or Li An, even for us from mainland. I wasn't very knowledgeable about Taiwan cinema back then. I had a lot of homework to do myself. So that was really eye-opening. And I think the film had just won the Golden Bear at the Berlin International Film Festival. I mean, film festivals are good for those reasons. They promote less seen works by lesser-known emerging filmmakers. So that really helped to boost its release and the visibility in the States where it was made.
Yeah. For our main podcast, we're doing films specifically that are shot in New York City. And so there's a kind of a nice little thread here that we'll be able to look at this in conjunction with that. Because, it was shot here in the States. And I know that it was a co-production of sorts. There was, I know the script was around for a little while, like I think about 5-6 years before. There's kind of an interesting story I heard from the actress Joan Chen, who is going to be in the remake. But apparently she spoke to Ang Lee as a kind of an emerging actress at the time. And he was looking to her potentially as the Wei character.
Right.
And then the money never materialized and time passed. And then when the film actually was made, she wasn't involved with it, then, but is now in a full circle kind of way getting to be involved with it.
Yeah, that's how life and history work. They go in cycles. So indeed, if you recall from the book and the class, and tell students about that story too. He was a graduate from Tisch, right? MFA upstairs from cinema studies. But he was pretty smart student filmmaker and made a very interesting short film, which was set in New York too. It was very good, and so you should check it out when you get a chance.
I'd love to see it. Yeah, I really
It's also
would.
Immigration story, short and very funny and has about action scenes. There's some of the elements that later got transposed into Pushing Hands and the Wedding Banquet.
Right.
About Brooklyn, Manhattan, immigration, and also clashes between different communities and so on.
Right.
So it was very interesting to see his student work. But he didn't have very good luck. I mean, Hollywood is tough, independent cinema is tougher. So he could not really get his feature films made until years later, some years later, after being a house husband for years in the suburbs, writing his scripts and babysitting the kids and cooking. He's a very good cook.
I'm sure.
So finally, he sent 2 feature-length scripts to Taiwan's sort of government-sponsored emerging filmmakers award-giving competition. So both Pushing Hands and The Wedding Banquet were in that process. So he got picked up by the Taiwan government agency who's trying to promote young Taiwan filmmakers. Even he's based in the States, but, he's Taiwanese.
Of course, yeah.
And I think the international, transnational material in those 2 scripts were welcome because, Taiwan also wanted to raise its international visibility. And not to mention, there are a lot of Taiwanese people living in the diaspora as well in New York.
Absolutely.
As well. Yeah.
You've mentioned Pushing Hands, which was, I guess, his first feature length, Ang Lee's first feature length film that I guess he made and was released, which is also a very good film. Legitimately, it's a very good film. Now, I think Wedding Banquet, personally, seems to sort of take what he puts out there, a lot of the themes that I think he's really interested in, and really just takes it to this next level. I think just kind of supercharges it a bit. But I'm curious, your seminar framed Ang Lee as a filmmaker who just time and time again has transcended language and culture, has been very versatile when it comes to genre, and has a history of really combining a strong formal command of filmmaking with a lot of sensitivity for capturing relationships on screen. And I'm wondering, in your opinion, what does The Wedding Banquet showcase about Ang Lee's strengths as a filmmaker, even, we said, from the very beginning of his nascent career?
Right. Unlike many other art house authors that we know, who are usually sort of cultivating a more consistent genre orientation and stylistic signature, Ang Lee, in hindsight, after he made several films that seem very different, right? Topic-wise and genre-wise, it dawned on me, and other scholars too, that how do we really call this author, And remember, the course is called The Transnational Cinema of Ang Lee. So
Absolutely.
For one thing, he's not sort of a typical nation-based author, say like Zhang Yimou, fifth generation, or Kurosawa, Japanese,
Right.
They stick to a specific national setting and also genre sort of aesthetic sort of approach. But given that he is a student to begin with, international student, and then immigrant, and then stayed as a permanent resident, I think he's still a Taiwanese citizen after all these decades. That's sort of my perception. So he really strides different cultures. He had to deal with culture shock, unlike Kurosawa or Zhang Yimou didn't have that kind of problem, right? So he had to live through these challenges as transnational subjects, translingual individuals, firsthand.
Right.
So he has that sensitivity and insight into clashes of culture, the commingling of languages and lifestyles and values. So these 2 films in sort of his so-called first trilogy, combined with Eat, Drink, Man, Women, as his trilogy sort of with Taiwanese actors, Chinese sort of stories, are very much about these transcultural experiences and generational differences and gaps, right? Yeah.
Right. The book refers to it as the Confucian family in crisis.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
And another title for the trilogy is the Father Knows Best trilogy.
There you go. Yes, I think I've heard that one too.
We talked about that too. Yes.
Right.
There's always this patriarch figure, the father played by this famous Taiwanese actor Lang Xiong, who passed away, unfortunately, a few years ago. So he's this benevolent sort of father, but nevertheless very powerful as the pillar of the family.
Of course, yeah. Everything kind of emanates from him, like
yes.
what was important to him becomes important to the rest of the family. I think that's one of the things that for me is just so interesting too, that there's a meta aspect, I think, going on with the Wedding Banquet. Ang Lee himself is not gay, but I think a lot of what you brought up about him sort of having a foot in Taiwan and then a foot in the United States, and having to balance not only this idea of culturally being in between, but also he's talked about how he felt like it was a huge disappointment to his family that he was, as he calls it, an entertainer, which I think a lot of us would say that's selling yourself short. But in his eyes, he's like, that's how my father saw it. And so even though he himself is not gay, he's able to kind of transpose, I think, some of the ways that you feel marginalized from society and marginalized from your own family with this, which I find is really fascinating. Like, again, I feel like that could have gone so wrong, but it goes so right. I'm blown away. It's like a high wire act that he just totally nails. So yeah.
That's why it was a crossover success, sensation. It appealed to immigrant sort of communities, queer communities, cultures of other areas, I mean, one of his other films were adapted into, I think, Spanish language.
I've seen it.
Yeah.
It's called Tortilla Soup. In fact, I saw that film before I saw Eat, Drink, Man, Woman.
Right.
And so when I was in class with you and watching that movie, I was like, I've seen this movie. And Hector Elizondo plays the patriarch.
Yeah, I checked that out at one point too. It was hilarious. So sort of these transcultural family issues, we all grapple with. I think especially maybe Chinese families and Mexican families, Hispanic families have a lot in common, big families and generational structures, what you need to uphold and what you could rebel against within limits, right? I think it really crossed over to people of other cultural backgrounds. So back to An Lee being a sort of unfilial son, who didn't study math and he was pretty bad in that. His father was a school principal where he studied, so he felt extra ashamed, So then when he chose to go to art school, it felt like a disappointment and betrayal for the father, right? And then until much later, after he really gained a lot of more international accolades and success financially, and so on, then the father finally sort of came around to accept him. So this idea, feeling being an unfilial son, because as a filial son, you need to, be practical and study, practical professions in law or medicine, those type of things. And at least maybe a professor in philosophy or literature, and he was not so academic either. It was a very difficult time for him in Taiwan. And afterwards, he came to the States, continuing his education in theater, drama at Illinois, Urbana-Champaign, and then transferred to Tisch. It was a very bold choice, but also knowing it was precarious in terms of job prospects, especially for international students, without permanent residence and so on. So, but he went all the way nonetheless.
No, he did.
Yes.
He did.
And he translated definitely those feelings of struggles into many of his films, if not all, I would say.
Right.
Yeah.
One thing I'll say too is, watching this film back, I was surprised by some of the broad screwball humor. There's a lot in it. There's more than I remember. And, I don't think it ever really distracts from the more serious and dramatic moments in the film. I'm curious, would you agree with a statement like that? And I'm wondering, if so, why do you think it works well? Because it's surprisingly broad, but it's also, I think, very touching when it wants to go the other way.
Yeah. When I was watching that again last night, the film is older now. It was he was in his late 30s when he wrote it, and now he's 70. It's half lifetime almost. And the 90s, I think, if I recall, in the States, I just felt it was opening up in terms of multiculturalism, and the more international students were coming in and from different parts of the world, especially from China, increasingly so. Before was the Cold War Iron Curtain, only Taiwanese, were able to come because they were allies with the U.S., right? And then afterwards, when China opened up to the world and also improved its relations with the States as well as Taiwan, because this is all geopolitical sort of dynamic. So more Chinese students came. That's why you will have Wei,
right?
The Chinese artists in the picture in the beginning. But as a poor, struggling artist, China was still very poor in the 90s. And they had to struggle much more than, say, the Taiwanese students who had been coming from middle class, more affluent backgrounds. But now it's all changed again, right? I'm teaching tons of students from mainland China who are like affluent, like living in nice houses like Wei Tong does in the movie, right?
Yeah.
It's ironic how the world has shifted and changed. So where were we about?
Oh, just about the humor. I found there's Latin like salsa music that sort of accompanies a lot of these moments where they're like, we have to redecorate the home in order to not look so potentially suspicious.
Right.
It's a funny touch, to take some of these things down and replace it with calligraphy, which we find out is very important to his father and whatnot.
Right.
It's projecting it out to the cheap seats in some ways. But it's funny too, like one of the biggest laughs I just remember from the film is the dating service scene. But then it's like, wait a minute, they actually found someone.
Yeah, like a tall girl who speaks 5 languages and singing opera.
Exactly. Right? And like has a PhD or something. Something absurd. Like you have moments like that alongside, like one of the moments for me that is just kind of breaks my heart every time I see it. There's a moment where Wei Wei and Wei Tong, they're kneeling in front of the parents. And the father is sort of giving them a blessing. And in that moment, Wei Wei, just because she knows this is a sham, she starts to cry. And the mother comes in and she's like, we spent 2 hours on your makeup, please. And the father comes away from this being like, my speech really moved her. Like, and it's a laugh. It is a laugh, but it's also so rooted in the kind of sadness that is underpinning this whole film.
It's bittersweet, or sweet sour. So yes, this is very observant of you, and this is probably one of the most entertaining films he's made. He's made other very serious and dark films like Last Caution, remember, and some other ones later. So I've been teaching, Chinese film history a lot, and here in Shanghai to NYU, Shanghai students too. And one of the things I talk a lot about is the ingrained tradition of family melodrama. I think An Li grew up with that, and I think there's also Mexican family melodrama,
I would say India too. That's a big one.
Indian. These are the big family melodrama countries and genres because there are those sort of cultural norms and the modernity always clash. And then you have all the sort of possible scenarios. And some are happy, some are comical, like misunderstanding. Melodrama thrives also on misunderstandings, secrets, white lies. Like, this is a white lie, by excellence, right?
Exactly.
So they try to cover up to keep everybody happy. But then eventually it will be busted, and then there will be consequences. But along the way, it's this sort of laughter as well as tears alternating, and that makes the theater and the movie very stimulating, dynamic. That gives the film a lot of energy and surprise. But as an audience, we are in the know, because we are, watching them beyond the fourth wall. So we are rooting for some of them, and they do not know what's going on. And that creates all this tension and surprise. And so, we get both the sadness as well as the comic relief at the same time. Because if it's all sadness and disaster, then there will be no end to suffering, right? No end to social problems.
Of course.
And what culture production, cinema, television do, mass culture products in particular, is try to give us some relief and some possibilities of resolving these tensions. Some are like a century long, millennial old, how do we find a way out? I think, this type of films, I think he does beautifully here, is to show you there's so much you can do to put up with the restrictions, the confusion, family systems that dehumanizing,
Right.
and if you keep performing the roles assigned, you will just end up miserable and even life-threatening. The father almost sort of got into shock and died, right?
Absolutely.
So there should be a way out. I think the comic reliefs is not unique or brand new to Chinese family melodrama traditions. Actually, back in the 20s, when the Chinese Shanghai filmmakers here were experimenting with their own version of narrative feature melodrama after seeing Griffith, the other kinds. Okay, we have our own stories and problems. So a lot of the early family melodramas made in China and continuing in some ways would have these alternating rhythms, like extreme sufferings, dead end situations, hospital emergencies, betrayals, divorces, and sometimes death and suicide and murder. And then you also will have moments of kind of reliefs. Some reliefs are a little more like this screwball, humorous, and in the end, everybody gets something out of the situation and then be at peace with each other. So Wedding Banquet, in the end, after all the upheavals, all the madness, actually, some part really totally crazy.
Oh no, it's like anxiety inducing.
The wedding night, scene in the hotel room, for instance, which is really pushing the edge.
I mean,
he was really taking a risk there. I think
so too. I gotta say, so watching it back this time, I was really taken aback. I think you talked about how it's kind of boundary pushing. One of the things that I find really daring about this movie is that this movie is not afraid to show Wei Tong and Wei Wei as people who kind of get sucked into the tradition. Yeah. They're putting up a little bit of a fight at times, but they kind of get swept up. And I think in that moment in the hotel room, there's a little bit of that going on, which is like they feel the momentum of tradition just pushing on their backs. And there's also a scene when he sees her first in the wedding dress where he, for the first time, cracks what feels like a very genuine look of admiration towards her.
Yes.
I find that so powerful. And I think it's a meaningful move. And it's a realistic thing that characters who feel like they have to suppress themselves and have had to repress themselves to their families, it's normal and human to feel to allow in, even for a moment, what it would feel like to just go with the flow.
Yeah, I think you're right. It's very visceral and it's realistic, I mean, by the way, this script was also very much helped by James Shammas' support and help because it was Pushing Hands. It was mostly Chinese production. So this is a co-production with Golden Machine, launching the An Li brand. James Shammas, who is a professor at the Columbia University now, really helped to translate the Confucian Chinese material into sort of the American sort of setting. So things that seem to be incomprehensible or shocking become digestible, like you could do. You digested it very well. So you remember at the wedding banquet in the beginning, when they were still doing, having little drinks and having little antiques and so on, but not totally drunk yet. Things were not out of control yet. And Lee, in a cameo, sitting at the table, said that famous line, oh, what they are doing, this kissing the bride, guessing who's the bridegroom, is the result of 5,000 years of Confucian sexual repression.
Right.
He threw that punchline there. It's a shorthand. It's not entirely historically supported, 5,000 years, a lot of things happened,
Right.
In essence, he's not too far away from it. Then when they went upstairs, when the guests crashed the party, and by then everyone was drunk.
Right.
Other than the baby, other than,
let's hope
other
not.
than An Li's own son,
right.
actually. And his wife and the son, were also playing comedy. It's a low budget. Everyone, all the family members
Pulling
and
together.
friends came in.
Yeah.
So it was a real family affair. So the baby had to jump in the bed in order to give blessing to the couple's heterosexual reproduction, right? So that was funny, but that was sort of tolerable, a baby jumping in the bed.
Sure.
But then it went all the way, to something that could have caused discomfort, I think, for some people, right?
Yeah.
Everybody was under influence, under alcoholic influence and the Confucian influence.
There we go.
As you were saying.
Yes.
It's like this ocean tsunami enveloping you.
Right.
Other than normal days, you have the tides, on and off, not so dramatic. And this is the time when it is a tsunami, when you get suffocated.
Right.
You have no chance, no room to react. All you can do is sort of go along with it and try to survive.
Right.
So I think that's what happened. But it also shows the complexity of the characters, especially the Wei Tong.
Yeah.
Yes, I would say. Yeah.
Okay, we are entering light spoiler talk here. So if you don't want the original Wedding Banquet ruined in any small way for you, skip ahead about 8 minutes and we'll see you there.
But then Wei Tong's, these sort of wavering, some, queer community members sort of just would not condone his behavior, right? How could you go both ways, right? Are you gay or are you bisexual? Just show your cards, right?
Right.
But this is not PC, sort of like, show your cards moment.
Yeah,
it is the body, it's the affect that gets swept away by long-term social, political, cultural indoctrination. But if I may just quickly throw in, because now I think the compromise the family made, everyone in a way, also in some ways explains to some extent the practice of gay members in China and in Taiwan maybe for some time. They would do this, played both ways. They would marry and have a child to satisfy the parents' demands, the family demands, not the parents, the institutional demands.
Right.
And then with the knowing knowledge of the parents or other person, usually other than the wife, and still have their queer gay partnership and life, sort of double lives going on. So there are a lot of the so-called tongqi phenomena in China for some time, for decades, that women unknowingly married into this kind of pretense marriages and later had a child and began to suffer but could not get out of it because of the legal constraints and also the children's welfare and so on.
Of course.
So there have been a lot of discussion literature. Even I have woman writer friend in Shanghai who wrote a whole novel about that phenomena. So it's not so surprising to see what Wei Tong did.
Interesting.
But he did it unknowingly, but some people in this culture did it knowingly under the pressure.
Right. And it is an interesting spin, I think, that this film is straddling two different cultures. That I think the resolution is something that, while I think is not clean, is something that is agreed upon with a degree of happiness and joy and feeling like everybody in some respects is being placated. I mean, the ending of this film is a real gem. You talked about the idea of there being resolution or people holding things back from one another. And it's like, there's this strange in between, where between pairs of these 5 principals, or even between, you know, 2 or 3 of them, there's understandings, but there isn't an understanding of all 5 together, which it does seem like there is, like you said, sort of this Confucian ideal that this is pushing strongly against, or that the ending of this film is pushing against, or maybe that there's a Confucian ideal that is still there, but that there's all this other stuff too, you know?
Yeah. So a lot of things get collided here and had to negotiate with each other. The American sort of lifestyle or queer lifestyle and Chinese, Taiwanese Confucian sort of family, and the mainland, you know, Wei represents the mainland, which has been sort of revolutionized in terms of gender politics. Supposedly the Confucian old traditions had been thrown out by communism, but really not. You know, there's more ingrained. But on the surface, it seems less sort of this sort of, father-centered and Confucian ethos closely observed.
Right.
So it is a balance act there going on. But I feel watching the ending again last night, sort of agree a little bit with, more than a little bit, with one queer scholar, film scholar's reading of that. People usually interpret the father Lang Xiong's raising hands at the airport, going to the airport, as a surrendering to, you know, modernity, to this new border crossing world. So just let the kids be who they are. So he's giving up, he's going home. But the alternative reading is that it is also a victory, a triumph, like he's relieved, because the longer history of Confucian patriarchal system had actually preserved, allowed, enabled polygamy in Chinese, that men could have concubines and could also have homosexual relations while having multiple wives in order to produce sons. So this was in the Chinese dynastic imperial history. So in some ways, you know, and the father is from China originally, in Shandong province at that. He's general, remember?
Yes.
He went to Taiwan because of the war, you know, because he was escaping from arranged marriage, actually, right? And then Shandong province in China immediately invokes Confucius, where he was born. And also the patriarchal values are much more entrenched. To this day in China, we still talk about how the gender equality is far problematic than, say, Shanghai, which is much more cosmopolitan and so on. So in that sort of historical, cultural context, the father knows best. He wins, actually.
Interesting.
Wow. He had been observing already. He suddenly spoke English. He had known all along, not all along, but much earlier than the last moment of revelation, that his son and Simon were a couple.
Right.
2 chairs, why not 3 chairs, you know, and Simon is the landlord, does the cooking, all sorts of things. So he knew at some point already. So then in the end, he accepted him, giving him big hongbao, red envelope with American dollars, and say, you know, I know, let's just not talk.
Right.
So that way actually shows his authority in a more subtle and I think a culturally compelling way.
Yeah.
Surrendering to the status quo, but I'm also getting what I want because I'm going to have a kid. I'm having a grandchild, you know, and everyone gets something out of it. As long as on surface, the couple is married.
Yeah.
That's good enough to show his subordinates, his community back in Taiwan, and no face losing there.
Right. The moment you talked about saying that he was a commander, that is the first moment in this film where Wei Tong realizes he's really getting in over his head. I love this moment. Absolutely love it, because his father goes to him and he goes like, look, now that you are going to get married yourself, you're starting your own family. I'm going to tell you something about myself that I've never said before. This is my first time seeing it since I myself was married. And it was funny. I was like, that's so right. When you do get married, there is a moment with your own parents where suddenly everything kind of changes a little bit. The conversations change, things broaden, but also narrow in a really interesting way. I love that moment because I think that's the first moment when he realizes this is not going to be as easy as them dragging them to City Hall. Exactly. It's not going to be that easy, because his parents are going to suddenly open up and want this wave of tradition to happen.
To continue.
I love that moment. I can't say enough about it. Okay, we are leaving the light spoiler talk now. And from this point on, no more spoilers. Let's continue with our conversation. The last thing I'm going to ask you, the remake is about to release, and I'm curious, is there anything that you hope the remake is taking into consideration or sort of preserving from the original? Is there anything that you can think of?
Interesting. Yeah, I actually checked out the trailer after you told me about it. But it's going to be a kind of pan-Asian, trans-Asian production, Korean, Chinese, and, other ethnicities all involved. So it's going to be richer, but also in a way more challenging because the Wedding Banquet, as we see it, is still a Chinese story among the Chinese communities and with Caucasian, gay community being involved. But here we have a much wider spectrum of ethnic cultural representations. So I have all the expectations for surprises. I just want to be surprised.
Same.
And I hope you would navigate around those sensitive but important boundary pushing moments. The humor vis-a-vis drama or sadness. And there will be Korean melodrama tradition, there will be other kinds of, traditions all involved. How not to stereotype each culture,
right? How
to walk around the stereotypes is, I think, the real challenge by sort of Asian American soup that tokenizes Asian Americans. I think, and also how to be creative about it,
right.
And how to be able to laugh at yourselves, and deconstruct the cultural essences. There's no essential Chinese culture, Taiwanese mainland can be very different, right? And different provinces,
Sure.
So I think, this is a part of what I've been seeing in the last decade or so, the sort of new Asian American wave, right? There have been a lot of great films ever since the Crazy Rich Asia, which is very problematic in many ways, but it opened the doors, the floodgates, for more nuanced representations of Asian American communities, Asia Pacific communities, and all different people in general. So it's not just meant, I guess, for Asian American audience, just like the Wedding Banquet crossed over. So I hope it will be a crossover success. Yeah. Fingers crossed.
Same here. I'm excited for it. Thank you so much. This is an absolute thrill for me.
It was catching up with you. It's great to have another seminar after 10 years or something.
I know. It's really, really cool. And I very much hope that you get to do the seminar again.
Yeah.
And also, like I said, this was the standout film.
Thank you.
I mean, there were other great films.
I think Anli will be pleased, and I'm also very happy. This is why we do what we do and love what we do, and how education can sort of become a mutual learning processes and going on into decades later. So thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you. Take care.
Okay. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Thanks again to Professor Zhen Zhang for making time to meet with me. That was an unbelievable treat. I know how busy the semester gets, and it is not lost on me that you made time for a past student like this. Very cool. In addition to this podcast, you can follow us on TikTok and Instagram at Sleepless Cinematic Pod. Go see the original Wedding Banquet. Go see the remake and let us know what you think. You can contact us via email. We'd love to hear from you. Write to us at sleeplesscinematicpod@gmail.com. If you're listening to us for the first time, thank you for finding us. If this is the 4th, 5th, or 50th time you've listened to us, thank you for sticking with us. If you're not already following us, please follow us. We have really grown to love doing this, and it means the world to have our budding listenership grow. And if you haven't already, we'd ask you, return listener, to please write a positive review and rate us on your podcast platform of choice. This is one of the best ways for new listeners to find us and help our podcast take its next steps. You can also keep it grassroots, and you can tell a friend to tell a friend about the Sleepless Cinematic Podcast. That helps too. Have a great day. Be good to each other, and please continue enjoying movies.